afternoon and welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Angelica Spanos. Thank you so much for joining us today. We have a lot to get to today, but first off, I want to tell you that we're following two big cases today. And as always, we will bring you the latest from those courtrooms. You can watch all of this live on lawandcrime.com. So again, that was the prosecution giving their opening statements. We heard him sort of take us back in time, take us through the steps of what Jones went through. He painted the picture of what all went down, really. I want to bring in right now one of our guests this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, Gwen
It's my
Stern.
pleasure.
Tell us, what are your initial thoughts on this after hearing those opening statements?
Well, he started with storytelling, which is a classic thing that trial attorneys do. He tried to pull at our heartstrings. I think he could have done a better job of describing it in more detail, but it was a good way to get started as far as painting the story of the death of these children.
And when you're talking about more detail, this is already a lot that the jury is going to be ingesting. They're going to see pictures, just all these details. And again, these are children, all under the age of 8. So what is the jury looking at with this?
They're looking to see some drama, I think. A lot of times I've seen homicide attorneys have a little bit more passion, and it was interesting. Maybe it's the Vermont style that he was very low-key about the murder. I've seen it where people are just much more passionate, but he definitely forecasted what the story is about the deaths.
So do you think that on the other side of this, the defense has a good case for insanity here? We know that they are going to try to prove that. We've heard things about this all day long, quirky things he did prior to this. Do you think they have a good case?
It's an interesting case because the defendant was very bright. He had a great job. He had a normal life, pretty much. And you look at what he did, which is unfathomable. You would think that, like, who would do this other than somebody who's crazy? But there are definitely some aspects, for example, the bleach in the car, which would make you think that he planned this, that it wasn't just a psychotic snap. So I think that it is compelling because he was not showing signs of any kind of psychotic break. But I think having 5 murdered children, I just feel a gut reaction that I think after looking at the evidence that the jurors will find him guilty.
And one of the other things that has poked out to me during all of this is, like you said, the bleach. We heard a lot about the details of what was in his car. We had a forensic analyst going through all of that earlier today, pulling out documents, social security cards of the children, Disney World passes. It seems weird that you'd keep that in your car, but also, that could be a mental thing, hoarding all this stuff in your car. Why was it important that we saw all those details of what was in the car?
I think that, again, they're trying to show that he was planning this. When they're showing all the details, the photos and all those kind of things, it's to show that he had a plan, especially with the bleach. The bleach is just, why else would somebody have bleach and bleach marks in a Cadillac Escalade? It doesn't make any sense.
All right, thank you. We want to take you back to that courtroom and play you some more of the prosecution opening statements. So again, you're listening to the prosecution's opening statements in the Timothy Jones case. That clip was a little bit more emotional than the first one we heard. I think he does a better job of what you were talking about before. He kind of evokes that emotion in you. He says he hid. He got rid of the bodies. He wrote out how to get rid of all, he kind of laid it out a lot better this time around.
I agree. What I found interesting about that is, although the prosecution does not have to prove any kind of motive, it's not part of their burden of proof, he gave you somewhat of a motive, that he hated his wife so much that he didn't want the children to be alive anymore. I don't know if the jurors will buy that. I don't know. Another thing that I know has been floating out there is that he had just rage, that his son had messed up the electric socket in the house and that it just made him have so much rage. That it's interesting that he only stuck with one particular kind of motive, which is against his ex-wife.
And when we're talking about emotion and children being involved here, these kids were, 1 to age 8. These are young children. They're relatively defenseless when you think about, a man, much less your father. Why is children being involved in this kind of against the defense in a way here? I think that hurts them because these are kids.
Angelica, I totally agree. I believe that it totally hurts the defense because they're helpless and there was no way for them to protect themselves against their father. And in this particular case, I liked how the prosecutor said a father is supposed to protect his children. That really pulled at our heartstrings, even though the judge will instruct the jurors at the end that sympathy is not supposed to be a factor in a case. You really feel for these children that they were completely helpless.
And now that we've heard from the prosecution and obviously the defense is going to try to prove the insanity, what side has an easier case here? I know that's hard to say now, but...
I still think that the prosecution has an easier side because of the fact that 5 children were murdered. I think the defense is going to have a hard time getting over that, even though the jurors, again, will be instructed that they should not have sympathy as part of a factor in deciding this case. I think that it will still be in their minds.
Absolutely. All right, so that was more from the defense and their opening statements. We heard them recalling Tim's past, talking about mental issues that he had in the Navy. He mentioned their religious devotion and how they were regular church attenders. Gwen, another thing that stuck out was this analogy he made to a forest.
Right. I found that really interesting because when he started his closing argument, he started with this whole analogy and this whole story about a forest, how trees are not what they seem like. They're not like the seeds that they start with. So what a lot of trial lawyers do is what I teach my students is to use a grabber to try and bring the jurors in, catch their attention, and then use the theme throughout the opening statement, which is what he did. For me, when I listened to this whole forest thing after hearing about these 5 murdered children, it didn't really work for me, but he did use it consistently throughout his opening, so he did stick with his theme.
What did you think about him recalling his past, the religious part of it? He mentioned they go to church every Sunday, that he had once spoken in tongues. They also mentioned he wanted to be a Navy SEAL. He joined the Navy, but he did have these mental issues pop up.
Again, that was amazing storytelling, I thought. As far as the Navy SEAL story, that was really compelling because, of course, Americans love Navy SEALs and patriotism. And to be discharged from the Navy because of a mental disorder, that really forecasts the insanity defense. It shows that he had something in the past. As far as talking about scripture, that is so interesting to me because it really depends on your venue. He's in a venue where he is in South Carolina, where presumably most of the people on that jury are Christian and will relate to Sunday services and will relate to the scripture discussions. If he was, for example, doing that in a venue where there were a lot of Jewish people on the jury, that would not go over well. But he knows his venue and he knows that that's going to go over well.
He's playing to his audience there.
Totally playing very well, I think.
And when you heard, more of this unfold here, what is something to you that you kind of just said it, hey, that was a good move on the defense's part?
Yeah, I thought that was a really good move. Again, when I talk to my law students about using analogies to the Bible and things like that, I tell them to be very careful and to only do that when they absolutely know who is on that jury. It's very common that people do that. For example, in the O.J. Simpson case, Johnny Cochran did that. He did a lot of talking about scripture and things like that because he knew his jury.
All right, so again, that was opening statements from the defense. We heard a lot of nitty-gritty details there about what was happening in that car. He explained how Tim had kept the kids in the car wrapped in plastic for 9 days because he wasn't ready to let go of them. We also heard how he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And again, we heard the forest analogy all throughout that. Gwen, what do you think?
Well, there's so much going on there. As far as talking about the nitty-gritty details, he was actually pretty smart to do that. Instead of running from them, he's actually talking about them and embracing them to show in his argument, or not his argument because it's an opening statement, but lawyers do go a little over the line, that he was insane. I mean, who in their right mind would have dead children in their car and be singing songs to them? So he's trying to show you that how horrible this scene is to show that he really was insane.
And then back to that analogy, he's still going back to the tree thing. He said his tree was burning, his forest was tainted, or...
Exactly. Basically, he's going to, that the forest, the trees are diseased as the defendant's mind is diseased. That's the analogy he's trying to make.
Do you think it's working?
It's so hard to say because we don't know what the experts are going to say and how they're going to do on cross-examination. I mean, it's a very compelling argument. Again, I'm not crazy about this whole forest analogy, but he's being very consistent with it, which is what he should be doing.
And what about the diagnosis with schizophrenia? And he mentioned medication, that he was on a lot of medication.
Well, that is excellent for the defense, except the whole key to this thing is to remember that someone can be schizophrenic, somebody can be psychotic, and still know the difference between right and wrong. Just because you're schizophrenic or just because you're psychotic doesn't automatically mean that you can't tell the difference between right and wrong.
And when we're talking about the insanity, that means in that moment is what they have to prove, correct?
Exactly. Exactly.
And to talk about the law with that, what goes on there? How do they prove that?
Well, they're going to show, the defense is going to try and show that he did not understand the criminality of what he did. That is exactly what they have to show to be able to get him acquitted by reason of insanity.
All right, Gwen, thank you so much. We have to take a quick break. We'll have more when we come back. Thanks.